Chapter 1. Echoes Beneath Twin Suns. The twin suns of Epsilon 9 hung low in the sulphurous sky, their overlapping halos turning the obsidian forest below into a latticework of blue and gold shadows. Eidolon Base, little more than a cluster of modular domes and antennae strung like beads along a ridge, thrummed with the nervous energy of new arrivals and the promise of the unknown. Inside the operations dome, tension simmered as thick as the recycled air. 4 figures clustered around a battered holotable, its surface flickering with spectral graphs and shifting subsurface maps. The air snapped with argument. Alia Soren jabbed her finger at a jagged spike on the display. It's not possible. There's no known mineral structure that could generate a resonance at this frequency. Not naturally, not here. Her words were clipped, precise, each syllable honed by years of academic rigor and disappointment. Karen of Moro Mormon grinned, upside down from where she lounged atop a stack of supply crates. "And yet," she said, voice lilting with mischief, "here we are, watching the impossible do its morning calisthenics." She traced a lazy spiral in the air. Perhaps the laws of physics are simply shy when strangers watch. Scott Halberd leaned against the edge of the holotable, hands jammed in his pockets, eyes half-lidded but alert. "Or maybe," he drawled, "it's just a busted sensor. Wouldn't be the first time something around here started humming for no good reason." Nikki Taro, Eidolon Base's de facto mediator, circled the group with feline grace, her dark eyes sharp and unreadable. She tapped her comms tablet and brought up an overlay, a pale blue pulse threading through black stone like a vein of lightning. "The readings are consistent across 3 arrays," she said quietly. "If it's a malfunction, it's a very coordinated one." Elia's jaw clenched. "We're not here to chase ghosts or indulge in wishful thinking." She shot a glance at Karen, who responded with an exaggerated bow. "We need hard data before we make any claims, especially about that." She nodded at the glowing anomaly pulsing beneath layers of basalt and volcanic glass. Scott shrugged, flashing his crooked grin. "Sure, but hard data doesn't exactly grow on trees here, unless you count those." He jerked his chin toward the viewport, where the obsidian forest rose, tall, glassy trunks twisting skyward, branches fracturing sunlight into rainbows. Karen uncoiled from her perch and landed softly beside Alia. "If we always waited for certainty," she mused, "we'd still be huddling in caves, arguing about whether fire is real or just an angry ghost." She winked at Nikki. "Sometimes you have to poke the paradox to see if it bites." Nikki smiled thinly. "And sometimes you get bitten." She let silence settle for a moment, then addressed Alia directly. "What do you think it is? Not what it isn't. What does your gut say?" Alia hesitated, her shoulders tense beneath her drab field jacket. "I think." She closed her eyes briefly, searching for language precise enough to contain her uncertainty. "I think we're seeing energy signatures that don't match any known geological process. It's as if something down there is responding to us." She opened her eyes and met Nikki's gaze head-on. "But I'm not ready to call it a miracle," Scott snorted. "Good. Last thing we need is another miracle on the manifest. The last one was late and left us with a leaking water recycler." Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass and falling rain. "Miracles are always late," she said. "That's how you know they're real." Alia bristled. "We can't afford superstition, not after what happened on Astera 4. The memory hovered between them. An expedition undone by rumor and hope, lives lost chasing salvation in the dark. Nikki stepped between them, her tone gentle but firm. "No one's suggesting we throw out protocols, but we can't ignore what's right in front of us either." She swept her hand across the holotable, highlighting the anomaly's pulse. Steady, rhythmic, almost alive. Scott ran a hand through his hair, feigning exasperation. "All right then, suppose it is something new. What's our move?" Alia straightened, slipping back into command. "We need to send down a probe, full-spectrum scans, seismic imaging, chemical analysis." She glanced at Karen, who was already fiddling with a diagnostic module. "And I want redundancy on every sensor this time." Karen saluted with 2 fingers and an irreverent smile. "Redundancy is my middle name. Well, one of them." Scott rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. "You have too many middle names." Karen grinned wider. "You can never have too many layers." Nikki brought up another set of data, environmental readings fluctuating in time with the anomaly's pulse. Whatever's down there is affecting surface conditions, barely measurable now, but growing stronger every hour. Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for Elia. What if this is what they talked about? The Eidolon effect. Alia stiffened, unwilling to give credence to colonial mythologies, but unable to ignore the echo of fear in Nikki's question. Scott clapped his hands together with forced cheerfulness. Well then, let's go poke the mystery and hope it doesn't poke back. He glanced at Alia for approval. She nodded reluctantly. Proceed, but keep everyone on alert status until we know more. As Karen and Scott hustled off to prep the probe package, bantering about whose turn it was to wear the unlucky helmet, Nikki lingered beside Alia. You don't have to carry all their doubts, Nikki murmured. Alia massaged her temples, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. If I don't, who will? Nikki squeezed her shoulder gently before drifting after the others. The probe drop was a blur of controlled chaos, Karen coaxing ancient hydraulics into cooperation with whispered threats and paradoxical encouragements, Scott running last-minute diagnostics while humming an off-key tune, Alia barking orders through gritted teeth. Outside, wind keen through obsidian trunks as dusk pressed in, golden light fracturing into indigo and blood-red shards. 10 seconds to breach, Karen intoned solemnly from the engineering console. Telemetry nominal, Scott replied, fingers flying over controls. Alia hovered over Nikki's shoulder as live feeds flickered onto their screens. Grainy footage from the probe's descent through black stone corridors carved by millennia of volcanic fury. Depth, 312 meters, Nikki reported quietly. The probe's sensors pinged erratically, magnetic fields warping, radiation levels surging, then plummeting as if something below was breathing in time with their presence. Karen's eyes danced with anticipation as she narrated the readouts in sing-song rhyme. Down we go where secrets sleep, past molten bones and shadows deep. What sings beneath the surface skin? Let's hope it smiles when we begin. Scott grinned at Karen but kept his attention locked on the telemetry. Steady! Steady there! He punched up a new feed, a spectral image blooming across the main display. A vein of light cut through basalt like lightning frozen in stone, pulsing with colors that defied classification. Violet edged with gold, silver tinged with green. Alia leaned in so close her breath fogged the screen. Increase magnification. Karen obliged and gasped as glyphs shimmered along the luminous seam. Patterns too regular for chance, too alien for comfort. Nikki murmured, awestruck, "It's beautiful." Scott stared for a long moment before finding his voice. "If that's natural geology," he said softly, "I'll eat my boots." Alia was already firing off instructions, snapshots, spectral analyses, chemical sampling protocols, but her hands trembled on the controls. Karen's voice was uncharacteristically hushed as she studied the glyphs. "It looks like writing, but not for human eyes." Nikki caught Alia's eye, a silent question passing between them. "What have we found?" Outside, alarms began to chime as energy readings spiked across Eidolon base, monitors flashing warnings in urgent red. Scott swore under his breath. "We've tripped something." Alia forced herself to focus. "Lock down non-essential systems. Divert power to containment." Karen was already moving, her odd grace belying urgency, as she rerouted circuits and muttered riddles under her breath. Nikki relayed commands across the base, voices crackling back confusion and awe as word spread of their discovery. For a heartbeat, everyone stood transfixed by that impossible vein, the promise of answers glittering beneath centuries of volcanic silence. Then Eidolon base erupted in overlapping voices, scientists demanding data, engineers shouting about power surges, rumors ricocheting through cramped corridors like electric fire. Hope warred with fear as news flashed across colony channels, every eye turning to Epsilon 9 and its impossible secret. Alia steadied herself against the console, heart hammering as she watched humanity's oldest paradox take shape beneath twin suns. Miracle or curse? Outside, night fell hard and fast, shadows lengthening over Eidolon base as the team prepared to descend into darkness together. Chapter 2. The Eidolon Broadcast. The morning after the probe's descent dawned with a sharpness that cut through Eidolon base's recycled air. Twin suns crept above the horizon, their light fractured by the obsidian forest into bands of fire and frost. Within the base, sleep was a rumor. Everyone was awake, adrenaline still thrumming from the night's discovery. Alia Soren's face was drawn as she stalked toward the forum dome, her boots echoing off metal grates. Behind her, Karen of Moromoramon bounced in uneven steps, humming an off-kilter tune that seemed to mock the tension hanging over them all. Scott Halberd trailed last, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes scanning the corridor, as if he expected the walls themselves to start whispering secrets. Nikki Taro waited at the entrance, arms folded, gaze flicking between her teammates and the glowing comms panel outside the forum. "Ready?" Nikki asked, her tone neutral but edged with something brittle. "Ready as anyone can be before a planetary inquisition," Scott replied, dry as ever. Alia paused at the threshold. "Let's get this over with." The forum was cramped, a circle of modular benches and a battered holotable at its center, now configured as a broadcasting dais. Holofeeds flickered around the chamber's periphery, faces from every corner of the Persite expanse, some crisp and imposing, others grainy with distance or censorship. Political seals rotated beside scientific credentials and religious sigils. The world was watching. Karen dropped into a seat with a theatrical sigh. "Smile for your invisible admirers," she murmured. "They love a mystery, especially one that might save them from themselves." Scott slid into place beside her, flashing a brief, reassuring grin at Alia. "Just remember, if they ask for miracles, tell them we're out of stock." Nikki moved to the moderator's station, fingers dancing over controls as she brought up the live feed. Her voice, low and steady, cut through the hum of distant chatter. "Eidolon base is live to Perseid Central. All channels open." Alia straightened her jacket and forced herself to meet the digital gaze of the galaxy. A cacophony erupted, voices overlapping in a dozen languages and dialects, each demanding answers. "Is it true you found proof of the Eidolon effect? What are the implications for energy scarcity on New Europa? Dr. Soren, are you tampering with forces beyond human comprehension? Will this discovery be shared freely or monopolized? Does this confirm the prophecies of Saint Marrow? Is it safe?" Alia's knuckles whitened on the holotable's edge. Scott caught her eye, a quick nod, an unspoken promise. "I've got this." He leaned forward, voice pitched to cut through the noise. "Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's clear something up. We don't know what we've found yet. It's not a miracle. It's not a curse. It's data, and we're still trying to make sense of it." A ripple of frustration and relief ran through the feeds. A gaunt man in a Navy uniform, Governor Rallis of Perseid Central, spoke first. "Mr. Halberd, with respect, your team has triggered colony-wide alerts. Energy readings are off-scale. Are you in control of your systems?" Scott offered his trademark half-smile. "As much as anyone can be when their equipment starts rewriting the manual." Karen piped up, swinging her legs beneath the table. "Control is a lovely illusion, Governor, like trying to hold sunlight in your fist." She flashed a grin at the nearest religious delegate, an elderly woman draped in midnight blue, her fingers entwined around prayer beads. The woman's voice was gentle but insistent. "Miracles are often born from chaos. You stand at the threshold. Will you open the door?" Alia bristled. "We don't deal in prophecy here. Our responsibility is to understand, not to mythologize." Nikki interjected smoothly, redirecting tension before it could ignite. "With respect, Reverend, our first duty is safety, for Eidolon base and for every colony depending on us for answers." From another feed, Dr. Kiros Mendez, their most vocal scientific rival, leaned into his camera, eyes glittering with challenge. "Alia Soren, if these signatures are genuine, why haven't you published raw data? What are you hiding?" Alia met his gaze without flinching. "We're compiling preliminary results now. I refuse to rush interpretation for political theater." Scott jumped in before Mendez could retort. "Are we here to solve a puzzle or sell a miracle? Because if it's sales you want, I'm afraid our marketing department is just Karen, and she only takes payment in paradoxes." Karen made a show of bowing from her seat. "I accept riddles and impossible questions as currency." Laughter, nervous but genuine, rippled through several feeds. Governor Rallis pressed on undeterred. "The colonies are desperate for hope and stability. If this Eidolon can solve our shortages, we need to know." Nikki's voice softened just enough to draw out truth from anxiety. "Governor, what are you truly asking? For power? For certainty? Or for someone to tell you everything will be all right?" The governor hesitated, a flicker of weariness passing over his face before resolve reasserted itself. I'm asking if we dare believe in salvation again." Silence fell, a rare commodity amid so many competing agendas. Karen broke it with a sing-song lilt. "Salvation is a two-edged key. One side unlocks, one sets you free. But which is which? Ask carefully." Scott grinned despite himself. Translation: "We don't know what doors we're opening yet." Alia's posture softened minutely as she glanced at her teammates, grudging gratitude mixing with exasperation. Dr. Mendez returned fire, voice sharp as broken glass. "If you can't guarantee safety or reproducibility, what gives you the right to proceed?" Alia squared her shoulders, steel returning to her voice. "Scientific inquiry isn't about guarantees. It's about risk managed by rigor and transparency." Karen clapped slowly, mock applause echoing in the cramped dome. "Bravo! Now say it backwards and see if it makes more sense." Nikki's lips twitched in amusement as she fielded another wave of questions from colony representatives. "How soon can we expect applications? Will there be open access to results? Have you considered religious implications? Is there danger of destabilizing Epsilon 9? Scott raised his hand like a teacher calming an unruly class. "One question at a time, or we'll answer none at all." He nodded toward Nikki. Nikki isolated a thread from New Europa, a young scientist with haunted eyes. "What does it feel like," she asked quietly, "to stand on the edge of something that could change everything?" For once, Karen was silent. Alia answered first, voice barely above a whisper. "It feels heavy." She searched for words that could contain both awe and dread, like holding history in your hands and knowing you could drop it at any moment. Scott added, softer than usual, "And knowing everyone else is waiting for you to decide which way it falls." The silence that followed was charged, not with accusation now, but recognition. But pressure returned quickly as rival leaders jostled for position. A corporate envoy from Helios Dynamics chimed in, "Eidolon belongs to all humanity, or at least to those who can put it to use efficiently." Her smile was predatory. Karen cocked her head at Scott. "Efficient miracles are called coincidences," she whispered. Scott replied under his breath, "Or accidents waiting for somewhere to happen." Nikki leaned forward, eyes narrowed as she addressed the envoy directly. "We won't be handing over control or data to any one faction until we understand what we're dealing with." The envoy frowned but said nothing more, for now. A new voice cut through, brittle and urgent, a father from the mining settlements on Lyra 4. "My daughter has radiation sickness," he pleaded. "If this is real, if there's even a chance, please don't let politics bury hope again." Alia's hands trembled in her lap. Karen looked away. Nikki closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Scott answered gently but firmly, "We'll do everything we can, but we won't promise what we don't have." Across the feeds, old wounds surfaced. Failures on Astera 4 invoked as cautionary tales, demands for transparency tangled with prayers for deliverance. Karen interrupted with sudden clarity. "Hope is not a promise, it's an invitation." She looked directly into the nearest holofeed, defiant and kind all at once. Governor Rallis leaned forward again, sensing opportunity or desperation, or both. "Then invite us in, Dr. Soren. Let us help." Alia shook her head minutely. "Not yet. Not until we understand what help means in this context." She looked around at her team for support. Scott spoke with quiet authority that surprised even him. "We're not gatekeepers. We're guides through uncharted territory. If you want miracles or monsters guaranteed, you're listening to the wrong broadcast." For a moment, everyone, even rivals, fell silent again. Nikki seized the pause to summarize. "We'll share what we learn as soon as we can do so safely and responsibly. Until then, trust us to take this one step at a time." As questions continued, some angry, some pleading, the team fell into rhythm. Karen derailing, grandstanding with riddles that forced listeners to reconsider their assumptions. Nikki deftly exposing hidden fears behind loaded questions. Scott anchoring each exchange with dry wit and measured honesty. Alia fielding technical challenges with clarity sharpened by necessity, and finding herself both embattled and buoyed by her teammates' support. The conversation stretched on, hours measured not by answers given but by stakes revealed and alliances tested. By midday, exhaustion pressed down like gravity, but something else had settled too. Reluctant unity. As Nikki prepared to close the broadcast, Governor Rallis spoke one last time. "You are humanity's last hope now, whether you wanted it or not." Scott rolled his eyes heavenward but spoke into the silence. Hope is overrated, but I suppose it beats despair. Karen laughed quietly, a sound that soothed more than mocked this time. Alia looked at her team. Nikki's calm determination, Karen's irrepressible paradoxes, Scott's steady irreverence, and realized they were no longer just explorers or scientists or cynics. They were caretakers of possibility, however uncertain its shape might be. Nikki signed off with words that would echo across every colony. We don't offer miracles, only honest dialogue and careful work. Stay tuned. As the feeds winked out one by one and Eidolon base fell quiet again, Scott let out a long breath. Well, he said wryly, breaking the hush, anyone else feel like we just volunteered for sainthood or scapegoating? Karen stretched luxuriously on her bench. Saints get holidays, scapegoats get parades, right before dinner. Elia managed a tired smile despite herself. Outside the forum dome, alarms flickered again. Reminders that beneath their feet, Eidolon pulsed with mysteries yet unsolved. Nikki gathered up her tablet and led them out into the corridor where shadows danced under fractured sunlight. We have work, she said simply, and together they moved toward their next challenge. United not by certainty or faith, but by dialogue that refused easy answers and hope forged in honest debate. Behind them, across 1,000 worlds hungry for salvation or explanation or both, the broadcast lingered, a promise, crucibles of doubt. The obsidian forest was silent, but Eidolon base was anything but. In the hours after the broadcast, pressure coiled around every corridor, tightening with each new message from Perseid Central or desperate ping from an off-world colony. The world was watching, and for the first time in her life, Alia Soren wished she could disappear. Instead, she stood in the main lab, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on a bank of monitors scrolling lines of data that refused to obey sense or symmetry. Overhead, the twin suns crossed paths again, their fractured light painting the dome in warring bands of gold and blue. The effect was dizzying, appropriate, she thought, for a morning already spinning out of control. Karen of Moreo Mormon sprawled across a rolling stool, boots propped on the edge of a console, humming tunelessly as she watched the anomaly's energy signatures dance and mutate. If you stare at those numbers any longer, Karen said, they'll start blinking back. Elia didn't look up. They're not supposed to oscillate like this. Her voice was brittle, each word clipped. The decay curve is reversing itself every third cycle. That's not just anomalous, that's impossible. Impossible is my favorite flavor, Karen replied, grinning sideways at Scott Halberd as he entered with 2 mugs of what passed for coffee on Epsilon 9. Scott handed 1 mug to Elia. You look like you need this more than I do, or maybe we both need something stronger. Elia accepted it with a grudging nod. If caffeine can untangle non-Euclidean energy spikes, I'll nominate you for a Nobel. Scott took a long sip before replying. If caffeine could fix that, I'd already be a legend back home. He set his mug down and leaned over the main console, scanning the live telemetry. Still no pattern? Elia shook her head. No pattern that fits any known model. The probe's sensors are returning data that contradicts itself every 5 seconds. It's like Eidolon is playing with us. Karen rolled her stool closer, peering at the screen upside down. Or maybe we're asking the wrong questions. She tapped the display with 1 finger. What if the paradox is the point? Alia exhaled sharply through her nose. That's not helpful. It's not meant to be, Karen replied, cheerful as always. Paradoxes aren't problems to solve. They're invitations to think sideways. Scott shot Karen a look. We've got enough sideways thinking to last until next century. Right now, we need answers. He turned to Elia. Have you tried isolating just the gamma band? Maybe we're getting interference from... I've isolated every spectrum twice, Elia snapped, fatigue sharpening her tone. She caught herself and softened her voice. Sorry, I know everyone's trying. Karen waved it off with a lazy flourish. Tension is just hope wearing its armor backwards. Before Scott could respond, Nikki Taro slipped into the lab, her presence quiet but commanding, as if she carried gravity in her pocket. They're calling again, Nikki announced softly. Governor Rallis wants an update in 30 minutes. He says half the colonies are running simulations based on our preliminary data. She arched an eyebrow at Alia. Alia pinched the bridge of her nose. Based on our preliminary data? That's reckless. Nikki's lips twitched in sympathy. Desperation breeds recklessness. You know that better than anyone. Scott glanced between them, then at the mess of data on the screens. "We're patching leaks with hope instead of sealant," he muttered. Karen clapped her hands together once, startling everyone but herself. "Well then, shall we try poking Eidolon again? Or shall we argue about how best to poke it?" "Data first," Alia said firmly, regaining some measure of composure. "I want another round of controlled resonance tests, this time with triple isolation on all sensor arrays." She looked pointedly at Karen. "No improvisation." Karen mimed zipping her lips but winked at Scott behind Alia's back. Nikki studied the trio for a moment before speaking quietly. "After the test, meet me in the mess hall. We need to talk." Her gaze lingered on each of them in turn. Alia hesitated, then nodded. They worked in tense silence for the next hour. Alia barking orders, Karen responding with riddles so sly they almost went unnoticed, Scott quietly mediating every flare of temper. When the time came to activate the resonance array again, everyone tensed. "Power cycling," Scott reported, fingers steady on the controls despite the tremor in his jaw. Karen leaned over the secondary console, reciting softly, "Knock once for knowledge, twice for doubt. But beware what answers Eidolon shouts." Alia rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a nervous smile. The machine hummed to life. Energy arced through containment rings, sensors flared as Eidolon's pulse responded, strange harmonics rippling through stone and circuitry alike. For a few heartbeats, everything held steady. Then alarms erupted, energy levels spiking past safe thresholds, containment fields flickering red. "Shut it down," Alia shouted. Scott's hands flew over controls. Karen yanked emergency cutoffs. Nikki's voice cut through comms. "All non-essential systems offline." The surge faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the shriek of cooling fans and the burnt ozone tang of overloaded circuits. Alia sagged against the console. "That shouldn't have happened. The safeguards did exactly what they were designed to do," Scott said quietly, "kept us from frying ourselves." Karen offered a crooked grin. "Or maybe Eidolon is just shy." Alia glared at her but said nothing. Nikki reappeared in the doorway. "Forum call in 10 minutes, she announced. Scott groaned theatrically and dragged himself upright. "Anyone else miss obscurity yet?" Karen beamed at him. "Obscurity is overrated unless you're a secret miracle." Alia gathered her notes and led them out toward the forum dome, her mind whirring with possibilities and dread in equal measure. The forum was emptier than during the broadcast, but no less charged. Governor Rallis appeared on holofeed, flanked by grim-faced advisors. "Alia Soren," he began without preamble, "we've received word of energy surges during your latest test. Are you in control of your experiment?" Alia straightened her spine. The surge was contained within safety margins. "We're still analyzing the cause." Rallis pressed on. "Is there any risk to Eidolon base or the surrounding environment?" Scott answered before Alia could speak. "Not unless someone decides to run unauthorized tests based on incomplete data." Rallis ignored him. "Dr. Soren, how soon before we can expect viable applications?" Alia bristled but kept her tone civil. "We won't rush deployment until we understand both risks and benefits." From another feed, Dr. Mendez appeared again, smugness radiating from every pixel. "Perhaps you should let others assist, those less afraid of bold action." Karen cut in before Alia could retort. "Boldness unchecked burns bridges and eyebrows. Careful steps leave footprints that last." Mendez scowled but fell silent. Nikki summarized crisply, "We're proceeding with caution because lives, not reputations, are at stake." Governor Rallis nodded curtly and disconnected. As soon as the feed died, Alia slumped into a chair. Scott offered her a tired smile. "You handled that better than I would have." Alia shook her head. "They want miracles, but all we have are questions." Karen stretched like a cat and offered, "If questions are seeds, let's see what grows, but don't blame the gardener if weeds compose." Scott snorted laughter despite himself. Nikki checked her tablet and jerked her chin toward the mess hall. "Time for that talk." The mess hall was deserted except for a bowl of stale protein crackers and a half-played game of chess abandoned mid-move. Nikki poured herself tea and gestured for everyone to sit around one battered table near the viewport, where obsidian trunks loomed like silent witnesses outside. She waited until everyone had settled before speaking in a low voice meant only for their ears. "We're being watched," Nikki said simply, "not just by Perside Central or Mendez, but by everyone who needs this to work." She looked at each teammate in turn. Scott's guarded calm, Karen's restless humor, Alia's simmering anxiety. Scott folded his arms across his chest. Pressure doesn't make us smarter, it just makes mistakes louder. Alia stared into her cup. We can't afford mistakes. Not after Astera 4. The old wound throbbed in her voice. Karen broke the tension with a paradoxical smile. A mistake is only fatal if you stop breathing. Otherwise, it's just another story waiting for its ending. Nikki met Alia's gaze directly. What are you really afraid of? Alia hesitated, a rare vulnerability softening her features as she searched for words precise enough to contain her fear. At last, she spoke. That we'll get so caught up chasing hope that we ignore warning signs until it's too late. She swallowed hard. That I'll fail them, all of them, the way I failed before. Silence settled over the table until Scott spoke gently. You didn't fail anyone on Astera 4. The system failed you. He looked at Nikki and Karen for backup. Karen nodded solemnly. No riddles this time, just honesty. Failure is never solitary, not when hope is shared. Nikki squeezed Alia's hand across the table, a rare gesture from someone who usually wielded words like scalpels. Scott shifted gears, voice pragmatic but warm. We need to keep our heads clear and our process transparent, even if it means telling people what they don't want to hear. He fixed Alia with a steady look. You're not alone this time. Alia managed a grateful half-smile. Karen cocked her head at Scott. What does hope taste like? Salt or sweet? Sometimes it's bitter, but still we eat. Scott grinned ruefully. Right now it tastes like recycled coffee and anxiety pills. Nikki's lips twitched upward as she leaned forward conspiratorially. So what do we tell them tomorrow? That Eidolon might save us or break us? Alia considered before answering. We tell them truth, uncertain as it is, and refuse to offer guarantees we can't deliver. Her voice steadied as she continued. And we keep testing, carefully until we know more. Karen raised an imaginary glass. To uncertainty, the only certainty worth trusting. Later that night, after most of Eidolon Base had gone quiet except for distant hums and sighs from machinery too stubborn to sleep, Scott found Karen sitting cross-legged atop a crate outside Engineering Bay 2, staring up at the fractured sky. He climbed up beside her without asking permission. After a while, he spoke. You really think there's wisdom in paradox? Or do you just like watching people squirm? Karen grinned without looking away from the stars. Both are true, or neither is. She glanced sideways at him, eyes alight with mischief and something deeper beneath it. Paradox keeps us honest. It reminds us that certainty is often just fear dressed up in logic's clothes. Scott mulled that over in silence. Below them, Eidolon Base glimmered under twin moons now risen above jagged glass trees, a beacon or a warning light depending on who was watching. Do you Chapter 4. Fault Lines. The obsidian forest shimmered in the half-light, its fractured trunks whispering with each tremor beneath the surface. Eidolon Base, always restless, now vibrated with a new kind of unease, a pulse that seemed to echo from the anomaly below and the tightening knots within its walls. Scott Halberd stood at the viewport of the comms dome, watching shadows ripple across the glassy terrain. He'd slept little. The air tasted of ozone and tension. Every corridor hummed with rumors. Some whispered, some shouted. Hope had curdled into suspicion. His comms tablet pinged. A message, unsigned but familiar in its clipped cadence. Meet me in Storage 3, now. Scott grimaced. He'd recognize that style anywhere. Jules Vass, his old friend from training days on Luna, now the base's logistics chief. Lately, Jules had been distant, always glancing over his shoulder, always with too many secrets. He made his way through the labyrinthine corridors, sidestepping a pair of engineers arguing over power allocations. The nearer he got to Storage 3, the more aware he became of the silence, a hush broken only by the low groan of shifting metal. Inside, Jules waited, arms folded, eyes darting to the security cam before flicking back to Scott. You're late, Jules hissed. 5 seconds? You getting jumpy in your old age? Scott replied, forcing a smirk he didn't feel. Jules didn't return it. Did you see this? He shoved a portable holopad into Scott's hands. Data scrolled across the display, energy readings, sensor logs, annotated diagrams. But something was wrong. The signatures were time-stamped only hours ago and cross-referenced with locations outside Eidolon Base. Scott's blood chilled. Where did you get these? Jules chewed his lip. Off-world relays are lighting up with chatter. Someone leaked our preliminary Eidolon data, full resonance logs, glyph scans, everything. Helios Dynamics is already running their own tests on Lyra 4, and that's just what I could trace. Scott's hands tightened around the holopad. You're sure? Who? Jules hesitated. I don't know, but it started here. His voice dropped lower. I've seen you in the forum, Scott. Don't play dumb. You know what this means. We can't keep it contained anymore. Scott's mind raced. Images of unstable energy surges, desperate colony broadcasts, Nikki's warnings from last night looping in his head. If we're done chasing ghosts, he said quietly, maybe we can try something that works, like plugging the damn leak. Jules bristled. Don't turn this on me. Scott cut him off, voice hardening. Are you involved? A flash of hurt crossed Jules's face. You think I'd do this? I think desperation makes people do stupid things, Scott snapped back. They stared at each other for a long moment, old camaraderie splintering under pressure. Finally, Jules looked away. Just watch your back, Scott. Not everyone wants Eidolon to be handled gently. Scott left without another word, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. In Engineering Bay 1, Karen of Moro Mormon dangled from a maintenance gantry, legs swinging as she squinted at an array of sparking relays. The containment field had flickered again, another aftershock from last night's surge. Beneath her, 2 junior techs huddled over a diagnostic panel, their faces pale. Karen grinned down at them. Is it humming or singing today? One tech stammered. We can't stabilize the third coil. Field harmonics are all over the place. Karen flipped upside down and peered at the readout. Ah, it's not misbehaving. It's improvising. She slid down and began rerouting power with a dancer's grace and a poet's mutter. Behind her, Nikki Taro appeared, silent as ever but radiating urgency. Karen, Nikki called softly. Karen didn't look up from her work. If this is about the chess game, I concede defeat to entropy. Nikki cracked a thin smile but pressed on. We need you in command, now. Karen finished splicing a cable and straightened, dusting her hands theatrically. Let me leave a riddle for my apprentices. She turned to the techs. If you fix what isn't broken and break what isn't fixed, what remains when all is spoken? A paradox betwixt. The techs blinked at her in confusion as she followed Nikki out. As they strode through the corridor, Karen glanced sideways at Nikki. What flavor is today's disaster? Nikki's lips tightened. Someone leaked our findings. Unauthorized Eidolon experiments have started on at least 3 colonies. Karen whistled, a low descending note. Hope is viral, and so is folly. Nikki stopped short outside the command dome and gripped Karen's arm hard enough to hurt. If someone on base did this, Karen held up her hands in mock surrender. My loyalty is as tangled as my hair, but I haven't shared a bite. Her eyes were serious now, all mischief gone. Nikki searched her face for a long moment before nodding and moving inside. The command dome was chaos. Alia Soren stood at the center, flanked by holofeeds. Angry faces from Perside Central and Helios Dynamics blaring accusations and demands. You've lost control. Dr. Mendez barked from his feed. Governor Rallis was more measured but no less forceful. Containment protocols must be enforced immediately. If you cannot guarantee safety, Alia's voice was ironclad despite exhaustion. We're initiating lockdown procedures on all Eidolon interfaces until we can assess off-world risks. Scott slipped in behind Karen and Nikki just as Karen leaned close and whispered, If you want to stop a flood, try reasoning with water. Scott muttered back, Water listens better than politicians. Alia caught their exchange and shot Scott a look, a flicker of gratitude amid her stormy glare. She turned to address the feeds. We warned you all. Preliminary data is not a blueprint for safe application. Eidolon is not ready for deployment anywhere, not here, not off-world. Mendez sneered. Then why share it at all? Elia's jaw clenched. We didn't authorize any leaks. Governor Rallis cut in. That may be true, Dr. Soren, but now we must deal with consequences. The comms erupted into overlapping demands, requests for protocols, for oversight committees, for punitive measures against Eidolon base itself. Scott stepped forward into camera range and raised his hand for silence, a gesture that carried more weight than he expected. If everyone keeps shouting, he said dryly, we'll miss the sound of our own disaster sneaking up behind us. He fixed Mendez with a level stare. You want results? Stop sabotaging our process with politics and panic. Mendez bristled but fell silent. Alia took advantage of the pause to issue crisp orders. All research teams, cease non-essential operations until further notice. Full audit on data access logs. Karen piped up from the sidelines. When all is chaos and orders fled, count what's missing, then count your dread. Nikki muted the external feeds and turned to her team in private channel mode. We need to find out who did this, she said quietly but with unmistakable steel. Scott nodded grimly. I have a lead, but it's not solid yet. He hesitated before adding, it started here. Elia rubbed her temples, frustration radiating from every line of her posture. We don't have time for witch hunts. We need containment first. Karen paced restlessly along the wall. Containment is lovely in theory, but Eidolon doesn't like cages. She paused at a blinking panel and frowned at an anomalous reading. Elia followed her gaze and frowned as well. What is that? Karen bent closer, and suddenly alarms blared through the dome. Containment field breach in Engineering Bay 1. Elia snapped into command mode. Karen, get down there! Nikki with me! Scott, coordinate lockdown! Scott saluted sardonically and dove for the main console. Engineering Bay 1 was chaos incarnate. Lights flickering, containment field stuttering between existence and collapse. Karen skidded to a halt beside the array she'd patched earlier, the relay she'd jury-rigged now sparking dangerously. One of the junior techs looked up in panic. It's destabilizing! Your fix isn't holding! Karen knelt by the controls, hands moving faster than thought, her mind racing through possibilities as Eidolon's pulse throbbed beneath her feet. She realized too late. Her improvisation had dampened one harmonic but amplified another, a side effect she hadn't foreseen in her haste to avert last night's overload. She swore softly under her breath, then smiled grimly at the techs. Sometimes, she murmured to herself, a shortcut circles back around to bite your tail. She rerouted again, this time sacrificing efficiency for brute stability, and watched as the field stabilized, but at a cost. Energy readings dropped precipitously across all arrays. Elia arrived just as Karen finished locking down the controls. What happened? Elia demanded. Karen met her gaze squarely. No riddles now. I fixed one problem and made another worse. She gestured at the flatlining readouts. Eidolon's energy output just plummeted. It's gone dormant everywhere we're monitoring. Elia stared at her for a long moment before answering quietly. You did what you had to do. But her eyes betrayed worry, and something deeper, fear that their window for understanding Eidolon might be closing fast. Night fell hard over Eidolon Base, drawing long shadows beneath the domes as systems entered emergency conservation mode. In the mess hall, now nearly deserted, Karen slumped across a table cradling a mug of synth coffee gone cold. Nikki slid into the seat opposite her without asking permission. For a while they sat in silence, watching darkness pool beyond the viewport where twin moons rose above jagged black trees. At last Nikki spoke. You saved us from disaster today. But at what cost? Karen traced circles on the tabletop with one finger. When you improvise with miracles, she said quietly, sometimes you pay in ways you can't predict. Her gaze was distant, haunted by unintended consequences. Nikki reached out and touched Karen's hand gently, a rare show of vulnerability between them. I know what it's like, Nikki murmured, to make choices that haunt you. She looked away toward the forest shadows outside. If Eidolon really is what they say, a key or a curse, do we warn them, or do we keep searching until we're sure? Karen considered this in silence before replying. If you shout fire in a crowded world, you might save some or trample more, but silence burns too and leaves no door. Nikki smiled sadly at that, a smile edged with both hope and regret. I think, she said softly, we keep searching and warn them honestly about what we don't know yet. She squeezed Karen's hand once more before letting go. Outside, another tremor rippled through the ground, a deep vibration that rattled utensils on tables and sent dust drifting from ceiling panels. Karen looked up sharply as alarms flickered once again across base monitors, environmental readings spiking unpredictably. She caught Nikki's eye, a silent question passing between them. Is this Eidolon responding to us or warning us away? Later still, beneath the main dome, where filtered starlight painted shifting patterns on glass and steel, Elia found herself unable to. Chapter 5. Collapse. The ground beneath Eidolon Base lurched with a violence that was neither natural nor entirely foreign. Alarms shrieked through the corridors, sharp and unyielding, harmonizing with the guttural roar rising from Epsilon 9's crust. The obsidian forest outside splintered moonlight into 1,000 frantic shards as tremors threw shadows like flailing limbs across the domes. Scott Halberd was already running before the first klaxon finished its wail. His comms tablet vibrated so violently in his hand he nearly dropped it, every screen flashing the same message: seismic event, containment failure. All personnel evacuate to safe zones. He barreled around a corner and nearly collided with Nikki Taro, who was guiding a trio of sleep-rumpled technicians down the main corridor. Her composure held, but her eyes were wild. "Scott!" she shouted over the cacophony. "The main array's gone critical. Karen's still in engineering." Scott didn't hesitate. "Get everyone to the lower dome. No heroes, just move." He shoved the nearest technician toward Nikki and sprinted for Engineering Bay 1. Inside engineering, chaos reigned. Karen of Moro Mormon clung to a support strut, her hair a tangled halo around her face, boots braced against the bucking floor. Sparks rained from an overloaded relay as the Eidolon containment field flickered, threatening to collapse entirely. Alia Soren was already there, hunched over the primary diagnostic terminal. Her voice was raw from shouting, "We need to vent the auxiliary conduits before the feedback loop takes out the whole grid." Karen's fingers flew over manual overrides, muttering under her breath. A litany of paradoxes and half-rhymes meant as much for herself as for the machine. "If you break what's broken, do you fix what's fixed? Come on, darling, give me something I can use." Scott skidded to a halt beside them. The floor jumped again, an aftershock or a warning. "Talk to me, what's failing?" Alia didn't look up. "Containment's unraveling. Eidolon's energy output is spiking in unpredictable waves. None of our models fit what's happening now." Karen spared him a feral grin. "Miracles are always messy in the morning." Scott forced himself calm, his voice clipped, commanding. "Alia, what do you need?" She snapped back without hesitation. "Manual vent override. Karen, can you reach the south panel? Scott, I need you on emergency power cutoff. If this surges again, we'll lose more than the base." Scott nodded once and sprinted for the breaker panel. Karen vaulted over a tangle of cabling and landed at the south controls, her hands dancing through emergency protocols as if playing an instrument only she could hear. The ground heaved again. A wall panel buckled and fell with a metallic scream. Alia barked into her comm, "Nikki, status on evac?" Nikki's voice crackled through static, calm but undercut by urgency. "Most are clear. Storage domes took some damage. Jules is trapped with 3 others in Section C." Alia squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, then opened them, colder than before. "Prioritize containment here. If Eidolon breaches, there won't be any safe zones left." Scott yanked down the power lever just as another surge rippled through the base. The lights flickered and died, replaced by angry red emergency strobes. Karen whooped as her console came alive with green status lights. "Venting conduits now!" The floor groaned as superheated gas belched from relief valves somewhere deep below their feet. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then Eidolon screamed. It wasn't sound so much as sensation, a pressure in their skulls, a vibration in their teeth and bones. Glyphs on the containment display blazed with impossible colors. Energy readings shot off scale. Alia staggered back from her console, hands pressed to her temples. "It's reacting to us. Not just the systems. The whole anomaly is shifting." Scott gritted his teeth and slammed his fist against the emergency shutdown. "If it wants us gone, it picked a hell of a way to say so." Karen's laughter was brittle as glass, or maybe it wants us to listen harder. The floor pitched violently. Ceiling panels crashed down in a hail of dust and circuitry. Alia shouted above the din, "We have to abandon engineering. Nikki, status?" Nikki's voice was tight. "Section C is caving in. I'm going after them." Scott cursed under his breath but kept his voice steady for Alia and Karen. "No arguments. Move. We regroup in command." They ran, half-crawling through debris-choked corridors as Eidolon base convulsed around them. In command, survivors clustered around battered consoles as system failures stacked up faster than anyone could track. The atmosphere was thick with panic and accusation, voices rising in fear and blame. Governor Rallis's image flickered on a surviving holofeed, his face pale and drawn. "Eidolon base, report. Are you containing the breach?" Alia wiped blood from her brow and glared at the camera. We're fighting to keep the base intact. Containment is compromised across all arrays. Dr. Mendez appeared beside Rallis, voice shrill with accusation. You pushed too far. You ignored protocol. Scott cut him off with icy calm. We followed every protocol until someone leaked data and started off-world experiments we could control. He scanned the faces clustered in command. Some familiar, some strangers drawn here by disaster. Karen climbed onto a console and whistled for attention. A piercing note that cut through even the alarms. Blame is lovely, she called out, but it won't patch a hull breach or calm a quake. Her eyes swept the room with unexpected gravity. If we want to survive this, we need to work together, even if we're angry. Alia added, quieter but resolute. This isn't about who's right. It's about stopping this chain reaction before Epsilon 9 tears itself apart. Jules Vass stumbled into command, coughing and covered in dust. Nikki followed close behind, supporting a limping technician. Scott met Nikki's eyes across the crowd, a silent thank you passing between them. Rallis's voice thundered over comms. You are live across all colony feeds. The whole Perseid expanse is watching. What is your plan? Scott squared his shoulders and stared straight into the camera, his composure anchoring everyone in earshot. First, evacuate all non-essential personnel into reinforced sectors or off-world shuttles if possible. Second, isolate Eidolon energy feeds. We can't let this propagate off-planet. He looked at Alia and Karen for confirmation. Alia nodded grimly. I'll coordinate isolation protocols. If we can cut feedback loops now, there's a chance we can stabilize local fields before they cascade further. Karen hopped down from her perch and flashed her crooked smile at Scott. And I'll make sure no one tries any more clever improvisations, not even me. She winked at Alia, who managed a thin-lipped smile. Nikki moved among the survivors, her voice gentle but firm as she organized triage and comforted those too shell-shocked to move. Outside, another tremor rattled command, dust sifting down from overhead panels. On every screen across every colony feed, images of Eidolon base flickered. Scientists racing between consoles, engineers dragging wounded to safety, arguments erupting between desperate survivors. Hope turned to horror in real time. Broadcast live for all humanity to witness. Hours blurred into each other, the team working with feverish intensity as failures cascaded faster than they could counter them. The base shook itself apart piece by piece, domes cracking under seismic stress, airlocks jamming, emergency beacons guttering out one by one. At one point, Karen found herself alone in what remained of Engineering Bay 2, staring at a bank of dead monitors as Eidolon's pulse faded to a sickly glow beneath fractured basalt. She whispered into the void, "If hope is a candle, and fear is its wind, what burns when both falter? What light do we send?" No answer came, just another distant rumble as something collapsed far below. Later, in what was left of the mess hall, a space now stripped of comfort or warmth, the survivors gathered in ragged circles. Some wept openly, others sat in stunned silence. Still others argued in hoarse voices over whose fault this truly was. Scott stood at the center, flanked by Alia and Karen, each bearing new wounds and old scars alike. He spoke quietly but carried conviction in every syllable. We did what we could, with what we knew. Blame won't bring back what we've lost. A voice from the crowd spat back, "If you hadn't meddled, if you'd listened." Alia cut them off with unexpected gentleness. We did listen. To each other, to our data, even to our doubts. But Eidolon doesn't play by our rules. Karen chimed in with gallows humor. If blame could fix fissures, we'd pave roads with regret. But bridges built on anger tend not to hold up yet. Some laughed, a bitter edge to every note, but tension eased minutely. Nikki appeared at Scott's side and began to sing softly, a morning song from old Earth. Words lost, but melody clear enough that even those who'd never heard it before felt its ache. As her voice filled the room, Karen offered a trembling smile and added quietly, "We mourn what's broken, we name what we've lost, but memory is dialogue, and hope pays its cost." Alia sat heavily beside Scott, exhaustion pulling at every line of her face. "We should have waited," she murmured, not accusation but confession. Scott laid a hand on her shoulder. Karen squeezed her other hand gently between both of hers. "We did what we could," Scott repeated quietly. "And now?" Nikki asked when her song faded, voice raw but honest. "Now," Scott said after a long silence, "we reckon with what's left, and try not to make the same mistakes again." As dawn crept over Epsilon 9, a weak light filtering through dust-choked air, the battered remnants of Eidolon base huddled together beneath what shelter remained. Outside, fissures zigzagged across black glass planes. Inside, guilt and grief pooled between survivors like groundwater searching for cracks. Yet even here, amid ruin and sorrow, a stubborn spark endured. Aelia broke the silence first. We need to understand why Eidolon reacted this way. Not just for us, but for everyone watching. Karen nodded slowly. Sometimes collapse is just another kind of beginning. Scott looked out at the broken domes and shattered screens, and let himself believe that maybe hope wasn't gone after all, just transformed into something harder and sharper than before. Nikki wrapped an arm around Karen's shoulders and sang softly once more, a tune stitched together from memory and loss. And beneath Epsilon 9's bruised sky, dialogue began again, not with easy answers or miracles promised, but with voices determined to speak truth even when it hurt. The world had watched hope turn to horror, but here among survivors' voices raw with loss and defiance, the story refused to end in silence. Outside, far below fractured domes and trembling earth, Eidolon pulsed faintly still, a riddle waiting for those brave enough to ask again. And above ground, amid ruins and regret, humanity's last hope was not certainty or salvation, but conversation that dared continue even after everything else had fallen away. The tremors faded, but their echoes lingered, as Chapter 6 waited just beyond dawn's uncertain light. Chapter 6, Fragments of Truth. Aelia Soren sat alone in the dim makeshift lab, the only illumination a slant of dawn through fractured polyglass and the blue-white glow of her battered datapad. The twin suns had barely risen over Epsilon 9, their light filtered through dust and smoke that still curled from the wounds of Eidolon base. Around her, the world was a study in aftermath. Consoles dark, chemical stains drying on the floor, the low hum of backup power thrumming like an anxious heartbeat. She had not slept. She doubted anyone had. In the quiet hours after collapse, she drifted from crisis to crisis. Triage here, a snapped cable there, until there was nothing left to fix but the questions gnawing at her mind. Now, with the base hushed and most survivors sleeping or lost in their own grief, she let herself unravel. The data flickered across her screen. Sensor logs from before and after the breach, resonance graphs, erratic glyph patterns captured by the probe. She scrolled through them again and again, searching for any thread that might weave sense from chaos. Her thoughts looped restlessly. What did we miss? What changed? Why did Eidolon react, not just to our machines, but to us? Her own voice startled her, a dry whisper in the silence. It's like we were speaking a language we didn't know we knew. She almost laughed at how much she sounded like Karen. A soft knock on the frame of the open hatch made her flinch. Karen of Moro Mormon peered inside, hair wild as ever, but eyes shadowed and sharp. "Room for one more paradox?" Karen asked, half smiling. Aelia gestured to the overturned crate beside her. "If you can find a seat." Karen slid into place with unusual quiet, gaze flicking over the mess of data and the pale scars on Aelia's hands. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt fragile, like a bridge rebuilt after fire. Finally, Karen broke the silence. "Couldn't sleep, too many ghosts pacing the halls." Aelia managed a wry smile. "You and me both." Karen leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Anything new from Eidolon's entrails?" Aelia shook her head. "Only more contradictions." She tapped the pad, frustration leaking into her words. "Energy output fell off a cliff after your last fix, but at the same time I'm seeing new fluctuations in comms bandwidth and neural interface logs. It's as if Eidolon went dormant physically but started listening elsewhere." Karen cocked her head. "Listening how?" Aelia hesitated, searching for words. "Subtle shifts in signal noise. Background comms are picking up patterns I can't explain. Like something is echoing us back, not in energy, but in information or intent." Karen's eyes brightened, old mischief flickering beneath exhaustion. "Sometimes backwards is the only way forward," she said softly. Aelia almost laughed. "That's not science." "Neither is Eidolon," Karen replied, smile crooked but kind. They lapsed into silence again, listening to the distant clatter of someone moving debris in another dome. Aelia found herself whispering, as if afraid to break whatever spell kept them safe for these few minutes. "I keep thinking, maybe we were wrong to treat it like an engine or a battery. Maybe it's a mirror." Karen nodded slowly. Mirrors don't give answers. They show you what you're too busy to see. Alia looked down at her hands, remembering the feeling when Eidolon screamed, not just pain or terror, but recognition. She shivered. The sound of boots on metal drew their attention to the doorway. Scott Halberd stood there, rumpled and stubbled, fatigue etched deep around his eyes. He held 2 mugs, one for himself, one for whoever needed it most. "Coffee," he announced flatly, "or whatever passes for it now." Karen accepted hers with a grateful nod. Alia took hers with trembling fingers. Scott perched on the edge of a scorched workbench and surveyed them both. "Heard you two were up before dawn. Couldn't stand another hour of whose fault is it in the mess hall." Karen snorted quietly. Blame is easy currency after disaster. Scott sipped his drink and fixed Alia with his steady gaze. "You look like you've been arguing with ghosts." Alia exhaled shakily. "Only with myself and maybe with Eidolon." Scott grunted. "Let me guess, it's still not making sense?" She shook her head, not in any way that fits what we expected. She hesitated before adding, "But there's something here, not just in the readings, in how it responded to us, especially during the collapse." Karen interjected softly, "We kept poking it for power or miracles. Maybe it wanted something else." Scott raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Contact," Karen said simply. Alia nodded slowly, her mind racing through fresh possibilities. "It wasn't just about energy transfer or containment. It was about exchange." She looked up at Scott and Karen in turn. "Eidolon didn't lash out until we tried to force it into our frameworks, when we demanded it behave like a tool." Scott set his mug down with deliberate care. "So you're saying we pissed off an alien, what? Network?" Karen shrugged lightly. "Or woke something that never slept, something that listens more than it speaks." Scott considered this in silence, then nodded once as if accepting a bet he couldn't quite see all the stakes for. Outside, another mild tremor rattled loose dust from cracked panels overhead. The 3 of them sat together amid ruin and uncertainty, drawing strength from shared presence. At last, Scott spoke again. "So what do we do now? Go back to poking it, just more politely?" Karen grinned despite herself. "Ask a riddle instead of a demand." Alia met Scott's gaze across the dim room. "We need to approach Eidolon as something that changes in response to us, not just physically but communicatively." Her voice steadied as her thoughts clarified aloud. "Look at these neural interface logs. See here?" She angled her datapad so they could all see. Faint but consistent spikes in certain frequency bands whenever team members argued or collaborated near active nodes. Scott frowned in concentration. "Are you saying it was reacting to our conversations?" Karen's voice was soft but certain. "Dialogue leaves fingerprints, especially when hope and fear are loud." Alia's hand hovered over a cluster of data points on her pad. "Every time our debates grew heated, or when we reached consensus, the anomaly's local field shifted. Not always stronger or weaker, just different." She looked up at Karen. "You said hope is an invitation, not a promise." Karen nodded solemnly. Scott rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "So Eidolon isn't just some alien reactor. It's more like a catalyst for communication or evolution." Alia's eyes widened as connections snapped into place in her mind. "It changes us, our neural patterns, our interactions with each other, even our arguments." She scrolled through logs showing subtle shifts in EEG readouts from wearable monitors during key moments of debate and crisis. "Not just energy," she breathed, half in awe and half in dread. "Adaptation." Scott let out a low whistle. "All this time we thought we were trying to harness Eidolon, but maybe it was trying to teach us something else." Karen's grin was softer now, touched with melancholy and hope both. "Sometimes what breaks you open is what lets you grow." The sun climbed higher outside, burning away some of the lingering haze over Epsilon 9 as survivors began to stir amid battered domes and broken walkways. Scott stood and stretched until his joints popped, then offered a hand to Alia as she rose stiffly from her crate. "We should tell Nikki," he said quietly. Alia nodded, gathering her datapad and a handful of printouts, her evidence imperfect but urgent nonetheless. Together they made their way through corridors littered with debris and memories. Here a scorched patch where a containment relay had failed. There a wall marked with emergency evacuation routes, hastily scrawled during the night's chaos. As they neared what remained of the mess hall, a space now functioning as both triage center and communal nerve, the voices of survivors drifted around them. Murmurs of loss, sharp-edged arguments, laughter brittle as glass. Nikki Taro stood at the center, orchestrating repairs and comfort with quiet authority. She turned as their trio approached, reading their faces before they spoke. "You found something," she said. "Not a question, but an invitation." Alia nodded and launched into explanation. Energy readings gone dormant but replaced by new patterns in communication logs. Neural shifts corresponding to moments of argument or cooperation. Eidolon's apparent sensitivity not just to technical inputs but to human interaction itself. Nikki listened intently, her expression unreadable until Alia finished. "So it isn't salvation," Nikki murmured at last. "It's an amplifier for dialogue? For connection?" Karen added softly. "Or a crucible for change, burning away what doesn't serve until only truth remains." Scott glanced at Nikki, then at Alia and Karen in turn. "If that's true, it means we've been asking all the wrong questions since day one." Nikki smiled, a tired but genuine thing that made her seem younger for a moment. Maybe that's what Eidolon wanted all along, for us to listen harder to each other than to our own fears. Alia felt tears prick at her eyes, not just for what they'd lost, but for this fragile new understanding that shimmered between them. She looked around at the battered survivors clustered nearby, engineers patching cables together, medics tending wounds, even Jules Vass huddled in quiet conversation with two junior techs he'd once barked orders at. "We're all fragments now," she thought, "but maybe fragments could fit together into something new." As dusk fell over Epsilon 9 once more, painting fractured shadows across obsidian trunks and battered domes alike, Alia found herself atop one of the few intact modules, Scott and Karen beside her, Nikki joining them after making one last circuit among the survivors. They sat in companionable silence for a long while as wind whispered through glass trees below. At last Alia spoke, her voice steady with new resolve. "Tomorrow we share this insight, with everyone left here, and with every colony still listening for hope." Scott nodded slowly. "No miracles, but maybe a map forward." Karen smiled her sideways smile. "If dialogue is all that remains, let it be enough, for hope grows best in uncertain ground." Nikki leaned against Karen's shoulder and closed her eyes briefly, a benediction offered not in prayer but in presence. Below them, Eidolon pulsed, faint but steady, a riddle no longer demanding answers so much as honest conversation. And above them, stars pricked through thinning clouds, a reminder that even shattered worlds could hold space for new beginnings. Night deepened over Epsilon 9 as voices echoed through ruined domes, not proclamations or promises, but questions asked in courage and answered with care. In the fragments left behind by collapse, truth began piecing itself together, not from solitary genius or desperate hope alone, but from dialogue that dared continue, even when everything else was lost. And somewhere beneath fractured earth and battered sky, Eidolon listened, waiting for humanity's next question. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Dialogue That Remains. Dawn crept over Epsilon 9 with the hesitant grace of a world unsure whether to begin again. Twin suns breached the horizon, filtered through a haze of dust and ash that softened the jagged outlines of Eidolon Base's ruined domes. The obsidian forest shimmered in battered silence, its glassy trunks refracting light into fractured rainbows that danced across the battered polyglass. Inside the battered remains of the main dome, survivors gathered in a loose, uneven circle, some perched on crates, others standing or leaning against consoles, stripped bare for parts. The air was cool and faintly metallic, tinged with the memory of ozone and fear. Yet beneath the exhaustion and grief, something new flickered. A tentative hope, fragile but persistent. Alia Soren stood at the center, datapad clutched to her chest. She looked around at the faces, Scott Halberd's steady calm, Karen of Mora Mormon's irrepressible smile, a little bent but unbroken, Nikki Taro's quiet strength anchoring the far side of the circle. Engineers, medics, even Jules Vass, his authority now tempered by humility, completed the ring. Outside, beyond the cracked dome, the world waited. Alia cleared her throat. Her voice was softer than usual, but it carried. "Thank you all for coming. I know none of us slept much." A rueful smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. "But I think it's time we talk, really talk about what happened here, about what Eidolon is and what it isn't." She let her eyes travel from face to face before continuing. "We came here looking for a miracle, Or maybe just a solution to problems bigger than any one world. We found something else entirely. Scott shifted his weight and caught her gaze, giving a small nod of encouragement. Karen lounged cross-legged atop a crate, hair wild as ever, eyes bright with anticipation. Alia tapped her datapad, projecting a spectral graph onto the wall. Not energy spikes this time, but patterns, waves within waves, mapped against timestamps, team debates, arguments, reconciliations. "It isn't about power," she said quietly. "Not in the way we thought. Eidolon doesn't just generate energy, it responds to us. Not just our machines or commands, but our communication. Our arguments, our hope, our fear." Jules squinted at the display, confusion wrestling with comprehension. "You mean it listens?" Alia nodded. "Yes, and more than that, it changes in response to how we interact with each other." She let that settle before adding, "When we argued, when we worked together, even when we disagreed honestly, the resonance changed. Not randomly. It adapted." Karen's grin widened. "Mirrors show you what you're too busy to see," she intoned softly. Nikki stepped forward, voice gentle but clear. "So Eidolon isn't salvation, not the way Perseid Central wanted. It's a catalyst for connection?" Alia smiled at Nikki, a rare warmth in her tired eyes. "That's as close as I can get to explaining it. Eidolon amplifies dialogue, forces us to confront uncertainty together instead of running from it." Scott whistled softly, arms folded across his chest. "So all those hours spent arguing weren't wasted after all." Karen leaned in, voice sing-song. "If hope is an invitation and truth is a dare, what grows between them is what we share." A ripple of laughter, genuine this time, passed through the group. Jules frowned thoughtfully. "Then what do we tell the colonies? That there's no miracle fix? That all we have is conversation?" Scott answered before Alia could. "No miracles, but maybe a map forward." His tone was dry as ever, but softer now. A balm instead of a shield. One of the engineers, a woman with a bandaged arm, spoke up from the back. "People are scared. They want answers." Alia met her gaze directly. "So do we. But sometimes answers aren't what save you. Questions do." She gestured to the battered console beside her. "Eidolon didn't destroy us because we failed to control it. It nearly destroyed us because we tried to force it into our frameworks instead of listening." Karen chimed in. "Paradoxes aren't problems. They're invitations." She cocked her head at Scott with mock solemnity. "Or so I've been told by my very best arguments." Scott grinned crookedly. "I'll take credit for that if it keeps us from blowing up another continent." Another wave of laughter, a little less brittle this time. Nikki moved to stand beside Alia and addressed the group, and by extension every colony still monitoring their battered comms array. "I propose something old," she said quietly. "A ritual, not of closure, but of remembrance and renewal." She reached into a battered supply bag and withdrew 4 small objects, shards of obsidian glass from the forest outside, each etched with a different symbol: hope, doubt, courage, and dialogue. She held them out in turn. One to Alia, one to Scott, one to Karen, one for herself. "These are not trophies," Nikki said softly. "They're reminders that what binds us isn't certainty or victory or even survival alone." She looked around at each survivor in turn. "It's our willingness to keep speaking, even when it hurts." Karen traced her thumb over her shard and grinned. "Remembrance is laughter, and mourning is song. If words are our shelter, we'll find where we belong." Alia closed her fingers around hers and found she could breathe more easily. Scott regarded his piece for a long moment before tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Guess this means we're officially out of excuses for silence." Jules managed a wan smile. "And what about those watching?" He jerked his chin toward the comms panel, still blinking with incoming messages from Perseid Central and beyond. Nikki moved to the console and opened a channel. No grand speeches this time, just their circle, visible to whoever still cared enough to watch. She spoke simply, "This is Eidolon Base. We don't offer miracles, only honest dialogue and careful work. Eidolon isn't here to save us or destroy us, it's here to teach us how to listen and adapt together." She glanced back at Alia, who nodded approval. Scott leaned in so his face appeared on screen beside Nikki's. "If you're tuning in for easy answers, you might want to change the channel." His smile was wry but kind. Karen appeared beside them and waved her obsidian shard at the camera. "If you want riddles, we have plenty left." Alia took a deep breath and added, "We'll share everything we've learned. The data, the failures, the questions that still haunt us. But most of all, we invite you to join the conversation. The comms feed filled with messages, some angry, some relieved, some simply grateful not to be left in silence. Outside, a faint tremor rippled through Epsilon 9, not violent now, but almost curious. As the sun continued its climb and shadows retreated across battered domes and fractured ground, Nikki led them through their ritual, a song stitched from memory and loss and laughter both. One by one, survivors spoke their truths. "I was afraid," confessed an engineer whose hands still shook from last night's collapse. "I blame myself," whispered Jules. "I tried too hard to fix what couldn't be forced," Ailey admitted. Karen simply smiled and offered, "If failure's a teacher and hope is its twin, let's start our next lesson with courage within." Scott squeezed Karen's shoulder and added quietly, "We're still here. That has to count for something." Nikki's song faded into silence, a silence rich with possibility rather than despair. They sat together as dawn became full day, a circle not unbroken but resilient in its scars. As messages from Perseid Central poured in, demands for protocols and pleas for certainty alike, the team worked together to draft their reply. "We cannot promise salvation or safety or even understanding. Not yet. What we can promise is dialogue, open records, shared failures and insights, invitations to dissent as well as collaborate. Eidolon is not ours to own or master. It is a riddle that shapes itself by our questions and by our willingness to keep asking them together." As they sent the message out across fractured networks, a beacon not of certainty but of hope earned through honest debate, Elia felt something inside her settle at last. She glanced at Karen and Scott and Nikki, their faces tired but alight with stubborn resolve, and realized that whatever future awaited humanity among these stars would not be built on miracles or dominion. It would be built on dialogue that endured even when everything else fell away. Outside, beneath fractured earth and battered sky, Eidolon pulsed faintly, a riddle still unsolved but no longer feared. Inside the battered dome beneath twin suns, voices rose, not proclamations or prayers this time, but questions asked in courage and answered with care. As Epsilon 9's day began anew amid ruins and uncertain hope, humanity's last miracle revealed itself not as certainty or deliverance, but as conversation dared in defiance of silence. The story did not end here, not while anyone remained willing to ask what comes next, and somewhere beneath glass trees and shifting stone, Eidolon listened, waiting for humanity's next question.